Hi, I'm Jennifer Folsom, Chief of Corporate Development here at Summit Consulting, and this is Complexity Simplified. We're here today to talk about infrastructure, which is the subject of Summit's latest white paper. And joining me today, I have Brian Oakley from Scully Capital Partners and Anthony Curcio, a partner here at Summit. Thanks for joining me.
It's good to be here.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Okay, so people write white papers about any number of topics. Why infrastructure?
Well, we actually started talking about this paper back in February, and it was on the heels of the election, and there was a lot of policy discussion in the run-up to the election about an infrastructure policy and the amount of investment that we'd like to see as a nation. And as we looked at it, we saw an opportunity for incentives related to federal credit as well as tax policy to help encourage infrastructure investment. We thought it'd be a timely article to look into it and how the two can play together.
Yeah, it's also too some of the things that I work on. Maybe Brian can say the same. Can be a little dry, not all that exciting.
Come on.
But yeah, I know it's hard to believe. But infrastructure is really important. It's important to this new administration. It's all over the press. People can understand infrastructure, and it seems to me maybe this is one of those rare opportunities in our political culture where a lot of people are agreeing that this is a problem that needs to be solved. And so I think it was kind of a good time for us to dig a little bit deeper at this particular point in our history.
And so why did you two decide to collaborate on this?
Well, I've known Brian for years. We've collaborated on a lot of things. We work for different companies, but our Summit and Scully collaborates on a lot of things. I am an expert and practitioner in federal credit, that is to say federal lending, and know a lot about it. A lot of the programs that I've worked with are directly involved in infrastructure.
Sure.
So I understand a strong link between federal lending and infrastructure. Brian also understands federal lending and infrastructure, but he also understands better than I the tax credit market and how tax credits are used in infrastructure. So I called him up and asked him to collaborate, and he was kind enough to agree.
Yeah, and I think as we look at what's going on in infrastructure today, a lot of the discussions are very similar to the discussions we had back just prior to the Energy Policy Act of 2005, which is how to use a different mix of incentives to encourage investment in a particular sector. And I'd have to say now, 10 years later, that that legislation has been very effective at encouraging the development of energy facilities. And as a consequence, the tax equity market in renewable energy, for example, is quite developed, and the transaction precedents are well known and well understood, and it currently is a very effective means of financing energy.
And so what would you say is the single biggest takeaway from this white paper?
Well, for me, this is an enormous national challenge. The president has mentioned $1 trillion of infrastructure. I'm not exactly sure what the right number is, but it is an enormous challenge. And the takeaway that I've learned in collaborating with Brian is that there's not one solution to this. It's not going to be state and local governments alone. It's not going to be federal lending alone. It's not going to be tax policy alone. It needs to be all of the above. We need to look at our existing infrastructure programs that are already operating in government, have been working in some cases really well for many, many years, and engage them in this national priority. We need to take a stronger look at tax credit policies and tax policies and understand how they interact and push that. We need to find other ways to incent state and local governments who frankly own and operate most of the nation's infrastructure. It's not the federal government. We might need to take another look at environmental policy. All of these things need to be considered if we're going to tackle a challenge that's as big as this one.
Yeah, maybe to amplify on that, much of what we need is already in place. And so I think by adding incentives and building on what we have is probably the most efficient means to getting the levels of investment that are out there in terms of targets.
Got it. Well, I have learned a lot, and I certainly look forward to the next installment of this two-part series on infrastructure. This is Complexity Simplified.